there's this dichotomy in writing between the pantsers and the plotters. And on one side, the pantsers say, well, you just follow the muse, you take your idea for a book, and you just start writing. And through the process of writing, you find what your book is. You just need the setup or the characters or some good idea for your story, and then you just start writing. And then on the other side are the plotters. And the plotters are the people that want to plan out their story before they actually write it. And so they start thinking through all the different plot elements and the characters and how they're going to arc and all this kind of stuff. And the problem with that is both of them produce bad writing. In my early days of writing, I was a big plotter. I was the one that wanted to figure out everything before I wrote anything. I thought this would save me from writing a bad book. And really what it did is it just set me up to write a bad book. But then I've also seen the pantser side of the equation, and that doesn't actually produce a great book either. So what's going on here? What's the difference between pantsers and plotters, and how does this actually help you write the kind of book that you want to write? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, my name is Tim Grahl. I'm the CEO of StoryGrid, where we help writers build the skills, write a book, and leave a legacy. I'm the author of The Threshing, Running Down a Dream, and my new book is The Shithead. My partner, Sean Coyne, is the creator and founder of StoryGrid. He's a writer, editor, and researcher with over 30 years of experience, and everything we teach here at StoryGrid is based on his success in the publishing industry and what he has learned about telling great stories. So probably the most famous pantser among us is Stephen King. Famously, in his book on writing, he talks about he just comes up with the story idea, thinks about it for a little bit, and then just starts writing it out, and that's how you should write a book. So let's talk first about Stephen King, his process, and how he got to his process. Now, to do this, I'm going to use an illustration, and I'm actually going to draw something out. I'm not a great illustrator or artist, but I think it'll help us understand my point here. So there's so many stories of writers who start out just writing, and they kind of say that this is the only way you can really learn how to write is by sitting down and writing lots and lots of words. And so the picture I always get is there's this giant forest, okay? So we're going to pretend like this is a forest, okay? And the writer's over here, and they decide they want to write. And for Stephen King, he was 10 or 12 years old, something like that. So they enter into this forest, and they start just wandering around. And they're writing, and they're turning stuff into magazines, and they're trying to get some feedback. And along the way, they start discovering some things kind of by random that work. So he starts learning a little bit about plot. He starts learning a little bit about character development, but it's all just kind of random. And the why I use this illustration is I think of it like orienteering, which is going into a giant forest and trying to find your way through and out of the forest. Now, all of us, if we had unlimited time and resources and we knew we wouldn't die of starvation or eaten by a bear, we could go into a forest and we would eventually, after wandering around and going in circles for a while, we would find our way out. And in that process, we would learn some things. We would learn like, oh, if I keep the sun on my left, then I'll keep going in the right direction. If I find a stream, I can follow that. Moss grows on this particular side of the tree, and we start picking this stuff, but we pick it up intuitively. So all of these things we figure out, but we do it intuitively over a really long period of time. And this is what is happening to writers like Stephen King and others, and Lamott talks about this, of just writing tons and tons, and eventually you end up learning some things about writing. And so this is what's happening, is they're kind of going all through here. They're learning how to do exposition really well. They're learning how to write great action. They're learning how to build tension in their story. But again, they're just kind of randomly doing this, and they learn this stuff over a long period of time. But this is what you see when you look at any writer's great stories, is they all abide by the same rules. This is my point here, is that every story follows the same basic rules of what makes a story work. And so how is it that the people that are pantsing it, like Stephen King, versus the writers that are planning everything out, if both of the stories work and they're doing all of these things the right way, what does that say for their entire process? So now when Stephen King sits down to write a book and he's just pantsing it, the problem is he's not really actually pantsing it because he now knows all of these different things, but he knows them intuitively. So when he enters the forest, he's going into it with all of this knowledge that he's built around plot, character development, exposition, action. Obviously, there's so many other things that go into a story, but I'm going to keep using those. And instead of wandering around now, he's pretty much just knows how to go through the forest, find his way through all of these things, and come out the other end with the story. But he's doing it, again, intuitively. So I had a good friend that was one of these orienteering guys. He could go out into the woods by himself with just some supplies and a tent and a few things, and he could find his way through a forest and come out the other end completely safe. And he had done it for so long that he did most of it intuitively. He could just kind of do it. And when I would ask him specifics, he could explain it to me, but he could mostly just go into the forest and then find his way through and come out the other end safe because he was doing all of the things it took to survive in the wilderness, and he'd been doing it so long that he just naturally took care of all of the things that he has to do. So he's able to navigate a forest that he's unfamiliar with the same way that Stephen King can navigate a story that he's unfamiliar with because he's writing it for the first time. The biggest difference is how they learned how to do what they do. Anybody who would try to learn orienteering the same way that Stephen King and others learned writing would die because they would get lost in the forest, run out of food, get eaten by a bear, run out of water, and never find their way out. And so when my friend was taught how to do orienteering, he wasn't taught to figure it out intuitively. He was taught it explicitly. So he had a teacher that took him out into the woods and taught him all of the different skills that go into surviving in a forest. How to use a compass, how to read the sun, how to read rivers and trees, and all of these things that I don't know how to do. But somebody taught him how to do those, and he learned them so well that over time, he was able to move them from explicit understanding to intuitive understanding. And this is how we learn almost anything. You think about when you first learned how to ride a bike, you're focusing really hard on the handlebars and how to steer them or how to pedal or how to balance. And then you had somebody that was teaching you how to do all of these things explicitly. And then as you learned them, they became intuitive, where now you can probably ride a bike while not even thinking about it. So here's the point I want to make about pantser versus plotter. So we're going to have this guy, and we're going to say that he's the pantser. And then we're going to have this girl, and we're going to say that she's the plotter. So the pantser is going to have a basic idea for a story and then enter the woods and then generally hit all of these marks and then come out the other end with a story. The plotter is going to plan ahead, thinking through all of these things, but they're also going to hit all the same marks and come out with a working story. The difference between what's happening here is that these are pros. And what we're dealing with most of the time when we're arguing pantser versus plotter is we're dealing with amateurs. This is what I was. When I was trying to plot out my story, and I would work really hard to plot out my story, then I sit down and wrote it, and then I came out with something that was not a story. That's because I was an amateur writer and I didn't understand how to do all the things that it actually takes to write a story. And so whether or not you're a pantser or a plotter does not matter what comes out the other end. It's whether or not you're pro or you're an amateur. And so here's the big point I want to make. There are skills that go into writing. These are everything from your line-by-line writing and how to write a great sentence, to the 5 commandments of storytelling, to genre and obligatory moments and conventions. There's all these different skills that go into it. I'm just going to keep writing down plot, character development, action, and exposition. But again, these are just a handful. There's a lot of them. So these are all the skills. So no matter whether you are a pantser or you are a plotter, you have to learn the same skills. The same things show up in working stories. So here's my question to you. How do you want to learn these? Do you want to be like the amateur pantsers, which is how Stephen King started, who goes into the woods and for years and years, they wander around, eventually pick up all of these skills and start learning how to come out the other end with a book? Or would you want to learn these skills the same way my buddy learned orienteering, where somebody walked them through learning the skills, and it was a lot easier to learn the skills and start coming out the other side? So this is my point when people talk about how, well, I have to write 200,000 words of my novel before I can actually figure out what I'm trying to say. And I'm like, okay, that works the same way, if I live in Los Angeles and I want to get to New York City, I can walk to get there. I will eventually find myself there. But there are more efficient ways to actually do things. So when you're trying to pick up all of these skills of writing that you have to learn, again, from the sentence up to the scene, up to the full story, you can write for years and years and years and hope that you eventually find them. Or you can figure out what those skills are and learn them on purpose. So here's the big thing I want you to take away, and it took me a long time to really face this within myself, that the dichotomy is not between pantser and plotter. That doesn't actually matter. That's much more of a preference than whether or not it actually matters. The real thing that matters are, do you have the skills in order to write a great story? Because these are skills that you can learn, just like you can learn any other skills, is how to write a great story. And the real choice is not between pantser and plotter. The real choice is, are you going to randomly just keep writing words for a really long time, hoping eventually you'll learn these skills? Or are you going to slow down, just like my friend did when he wanted to learn orienteering? He didn't just grab a compass and run off into the woods. He found somebody that could actually walk him through developing the skills. And I know for myself, I tried for years and years and years to write by just writing words. And then I found Sean Coyne, the creator and founder of StoryGrid, and he actually started systematically walking me through how to pick up these skills. And that's when I actually became the writer that I wanted to be. Now, if you're wondering what these skills are, I've got something great for you, because here at StoryGrid, the thing that we focus on first is how to write a really great scene. If you can write one great scene that gets somebody to read to the end and be excited to keep reading, now you're on the right track. And we have our 13-point scene writing checklist that we use here at StoryGrid to both teach scene writing and evaluate how somebody did. And I want to give that to you right now. So if you go to storygrid.com/checklist, you can download the exact 13-point scene writing checklist that we use here at StoryGrid to both write our scenes and evaluate where writers are at with these skills. If I could go back in time and start over with my writing journey, the one big change I would make is realize it's not just about churning out words. It's not just about finishing a novel. It's not just about telling the story that's in my heart. It's about systematically learning the skills of how to write something great. And then I will have the skills to take that story that's inside of myself and get it out to the world. Our goal here at StoryGrid is to help you build the skills, write a book, and leave your legacy. That's why we put out so many free videos here on YouTube. That's why there's so many resources on our website, is we want to help you do this. If you want to dig deeper into this, I highly recommend you join us for our next workshop. It's starting next month. It's called Mastering Line by Line in Fiction, and it's a great primer on how to actually apply these skills and level up your writing. So go to storygrid.com/workshop to check that out as well. The links to both the workshop and the checklist are down in the description. Also, if you like this video, if anything in this was helpful at all, I highly recommend you click like and hit subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. I also have a video up That's the 10 biggest scene writing mistakes that people make. I'm going to put that up on the screen shortly, so check that out next. But as always, thanks for being a writer. Thanks for being a part of our community here at StoryGrid, and I'll see you next time.